The COO's face went crimson as he jabbed his finger toward my screen. These route calculations are defective, Evadne, completely unreliable. My hands were still on the keyboard when security appeared at my cubicle. 23 minutes later, my badge was deactivated, my system's access revoked, and I was walking out of Skybridge Aviation with a cardboard box that barely weighed 3 pounds. I didn't argue. I didn't defend the 18 months of work that had restructured their entire logistics matrix. I just left. At 7:45 the next morning, my phone started buzzing. Text after text, email after email. Then the calls started coming in. Numbers I didn't recognize. Numbers I did recognize but hadn't heard from in months. Federal Aviation Administration officials had arrived at Skybridge headquarters with grounding orders. Every single aircraft in the fleet, 47 planes valued at over $680 million, was being grounded pending emergency safety inspections. The VP of Operations, Richard Holloway, stood in the executive conference room watching through the glass windows as inspection teams swarmed the facilities. Witnesses later told me he loosened his tie with shaking hands and whispered to the COO. "The woman whose matrix holds our entire $680 million logistics infrastructure. What have we done?" But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we dive into how one termination decision brought an entire aviation company to its knees, I want to make a quick mention. If stories about workplace justice, corporate accountability, and what happens when companies underestimate the wrong person resonate with you, consider joining this community. We're on a journey to reach 5,000 subscribers, and your support means these stories keep getting told. There's a subscribe button nearby if you'd like to be part of that. Now, let's get into what really happened. My name is Evadne Reyes, and until that Wednesday afternoon, I was the Senior Logistics Systems Analyst at Skybridge Aviation. That title doesn't capture what I actually did, but corporate structures rarely do. I grew up in a neighborhood where my mother worked 2 jobs to keep our small apartment, and my father drove delivery trucks 6 days a week. They weren't poverty-stricken. We always had food and a roof, but they understood the value of a dollar earned and the dignity of work done right. They taught me that empathy isn't a weakness, it's a superstructure. Understanding how systems affect real people, real families, real lives, that became my foundation. I put myself through state college, graduated with degrees in mathematics and computer science, and spent 5 years at a freight logistics company before Skybridge recruited me. They wanted someone who could optimize their route systems, reduce fuel costs, and improve on-time performance without compromising safety. I delivered all 3. What they didn't expect was that I'd also build a system so integrated, so essential to their daily operations, that removing me from it would be like pulling the keystone from an arch. When I first arrived at Skybridge, their logistics were a mess. Routes were planned using software from 2009, updated manually by 3 different departments that rarely communicated with each other. Flight crews often didn't know about cargo loads until 90 minutes before departure. Maintenance schedules conflicted with route assignments. Fuel calculations were conservative to the point of waste. They were essentially flying with extra weight just in case. The inefficiency was costing them millions annually. My first project was a diagnostic analysis. I spent 6 weeks just observing, interviewing crew members, maintenance staff, cargo handlers, dispatchers. I sat in on planning meetings. I reviewed 3 years of flight data, delay reports, fuel consumption records, maintenance logs. What I found was that the problems weren't isolated technical issues. They were systemic failures caused by information silos. The cargo team didn't talk to dispatch. Dispatch didn't coordinate with maintenance. Maintenance schedules were built around equipment availability, not operational need. Nobody was looking at the whole ecosystem. So I built one. I called it Nexus, because it was exactly that. A nexus point where every operational thread converged into a single, unified intelligence. The system integrated every data point across operations: weather patterns, aircraft maintenance histories, crew availability and certification levels, cargo weights and balance requirements, fuel pricing variations across airports, air traffic control delay patterns, even seasonal wind currents that affected flight times. Nexus didn't just plan routes, it optimized the entire operational flow. Within 4 months of implementation, on-time performance increased by 22%. Fuel costs dropped by 18%. Maintenance efficiency improved because the system scheduled service during natural operational gaps instead of forcing aircraft out of rotation. The company saved $4.3 million in the first fiscal year alone. I received a bonus. I received recognition at the company quarterly meeting. I received a promotion to senior analyst. What I didn't receive was any real authority over the system I'd built. The COO, Damian Whitmore, joined Skybridge about 11 months after Nexus went live. He came from a legacy commercial airline, one of the big names where bureaucracy moved slower than their wide-body jets. He had an MBA from an expensive school, 20 years of executive experience, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being seriously questioned. He also had very specific ideas about how aviation logistics should work, ideas formed in an era before integrated systems analysis. Our first meeting was cordial. He asked about Nexus, complimented the cost savings, asked a few surface-level technical questions. I explained the basic architecture, machine learning algorithms that adapted to operational patterns, predictive modeling for maintenance needs, dynamic routing that adjusted in real time to changing conditions. He nodded, smiled, said it was impressive work for a mid-level analyst. Mid-level, I was senior, but I let it slide. The problem started about 6 weeks after he settled in. Damien wanted to expand the fleet, add 12 new aircraft, and open routes to 4 additional regional airports. Reasonable growth strategy, except he wanted to do it in 7 months. Aggressive timeline, but not impossible. What was impossible was doing it with the manual override protocols he insisted on implementing. He brought in a consultant, expensive firm from New York, 3 people in tailored suits who spent 2 weeks asking questions I'd already answered in my documentation. Their recommendation was to maintain executive discretion over route assignments rather than relying entirely on algorithm-driven systems. Translation: Damien wanted humans, specifically managers who reported to him, to have override authority on routes that Nexus calculated. I explained why that was problematic. Nexus wasn't just calculating the shortest distance between 2 points. It was balancing dozens of variables simultaneously. Manual overrides would create cascading inefficiencies. If you changed one route assignment, it affected fuel calculations, which affected weight distribution, which affected maintenance scheduling, which affected crew rotations. The system is interconnected, I told him in a meeting with the VP of Operations and the Director of Flight Services. Manual overrides don't account for downstream impacts. We'd lose the efficiency gains. Damien smiled, that patronizing smile men in corner offices give to women who dare to contradict them. Evadne, I appreciate your perspective, but systems should serve people, not the other way around. We need flexibility. Human judgment still matters in this business. I agree human judgment matters, I said. That's why I built flexibility into Nexus. It provides optimized options, not rigid mandates. But overrides need to be strategic, not arbitrary. Nobody said anything about arbitrary, he replied, his smile tightening. We're talking about experienced executives making informed decisions. The VP, Richard Holloway, shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen the before and after of Nexus implementation. He knew the numbers. But he was also reading the room, a new COO with the CEO's backing versus a senior analyst, no matter how effective. Let's table this for now, Richard said. Damien, why don't you work with Evadne on a protocol that preserves system efficiency while allowing for necessary executive input? Translation: find a compromise before this becomes a problem. But Damien didn't want compromise. He wanted control. Over the next 4 months, Damien systematically undermined Nexus. He started small, requesting manual route changes for VIP cargo or client relationship priorities. The system would calculate the optimal route for a shipment, and Damien would override it to use a different aircraft or different timing because some regional manager wanted to impress a client. I documented every override and the resulting inefficiencies: fuel waste, delayed departures, maintenance scheduling conflicts. The data was clear. Every manual override cost the company money and operational efficiency. I sent monthly reports to Richard. He acknowledged them but did nothing. Then Damien started bringing in his own people. A new director of logistics planning, Marcus Brennan, who'd worked with Damien at his previous company. Marcus had experience in traditional logistics but no background in integrated systems analysis. His approach was old school: make decisions based on instinct and experience, adjust when problems arise. Nexus was the opposite: anticipate problems before they arise, optimize proactively. Marcus and I clashed immediately. He wanted to simplify the system, strip out what he called unnecessary complexity. I tried to explain that the complexity wasn't unnecessary, it was the entire point. You can't optimize a multivariable system by simplifying it into single-variable decisions. You're over-engineering this, Marcus told me in a meeting. Route planning isn't rocket science. It's literally aerospace logistics, I replied. It's adjacent to rocket science. He didn't appreciate the joke. The real breaking point came with the fleet expansion. Damien pushed forward with acquiring 12 new aircraft, smaller regional jets that would service the new routes he wanted to open. The timeline was ambitious, 6 months from acquisition to operational deployment. Nexus could handle it, but only if the integration was done properly. The new aircraft had different fuel consumption rates, different cargo capacities, different maintenance requirements. The system needed to be updated with precise specifications for each aircraft variant, and the route optimization algorithms needed to be recalibrated to account for the new fleet composition. I submitted a project plan. 8 weeks for system updates, 2 weeks for testing and calibration, 2 weeks for crew training on the updated interface. 12 weeks total, which would put us well ahead of the aircraft deployment schedule. Damien rejected it. Too slow, we need this done in 4 weeks. That's not realistic, I said. Cutting corners on system integration creates safety risks and operational vulnerabilities. Then prioritize, he said. Focus on what's essential. The rest can be updated after deployment. It's all essential. That's how integrated systems work. His jaw tightened. You know, Evadne, I'm starting to think you're more attached to protecting your system than helping this company grow. That's when I knew we were past the point of professional disagreement. This was personal for him, a power struggle disguised as a technical debate. I went to Richard directly. He was the VP of Operations, the person who'd championed Nexus from the beginning. If anyone would understand what was at stake, it would be him. We met in his office on a Friday afternoon. I brought documentation. Comparison charts showing system performance with and without manual overrides, projected risk assessments for rushing the fleet integration, cost-benefit analysis of proper implementation versus accelerated deployment. Richard listened. He reviewed the documents. He rubbed his temples like a man with a migraine coming on. Evadne, your concerns are valid, he finally said, but you have to understand the position I'm in. Damien has the CEO's full support. This fleet expansion is the board's priority. If I push back too hard, I'm not protecting the company, I'm just painting a target on my own back. So we just ignore operational risks because of office politics. I'm not saying ignore them. I'm saying manage them strategically. Do the 4-week integration. Document any concerns. If problems arise, we'll have the data to support additional resources. If problems arise in an aviation logistics system, people could get hurt. You're being dramatic. That stung. I'd never been dramatic in my life. I'd been precise, thorough, methodical. I'd built my entire career on letting data speak for itself. I'm being realistic, I said quietly. And if you won't listen, I'll need to escalate this to the Safety Compliance Office. Richard's expression hardened. That would be a serious mistake. You'd be going over the heads of your entire chain of command based on hypothetical risks. It would damage your credibility and your career here. My career isn't worth someone's safety. Nobody's safety is at risk. You're catastrophizing because you don't like Damien's management style. We stared at each other across his desk. In that moment, I realized he'd already made his choice. Loyalty to the executive team outweighed loyalty to operational integrity. I stood up. I'll do the integration in 4 weeks, but I'm documenting everything. Every shortcut, every risk, every compromise. If something goes wrong, the record will show I tried to prevent it. You do what you need to do, Richard said. Just remember, team players find solutions. Problems focus on obstacles. I'd been called many things in my career. Problem was a new one. I worked 70-hour weeks for the next month. Nights, weekends, early mornings before anyone else arrived. I reconfigured Nexus to integrate the new aircraft, but I had to cut corners to meet Damien's timeline. Normally, I would have run 300 simulation scenarios to test the updated algorithms. I ran 80. Normally, I would have calibrated fuel consumption models based on actual test flight data from each new aircraft. I used manufacturer specifications instead. Normally, I would have cross-verified maintenance scheduling protocols with the engineering team. I built them based on standard models and hoped they were accurate. Every compromise felt like a small betrayal, not of the company, of the work itself. Of the standards I'd built my reputation on, but I met the deadline. 4 weeks after Damien gave the order, Nexus was updated and operational with the new fleet integrated. The system went live on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, small problems were appearing. A route assignment that didn't account for a regional jet's fuel capacity, causing an unexpected refueling stop. A maintenance window that conflicted with a cargo delivery deadline. Minor issues, the kind that happened during any system transition. I fixed them as they appeared. I submitted incident reports. I recommended a 2-week calibration period where we'd run parallel systems, Nexus and manual oversight to catch any integration gaps. Marcus Brennan dismissed the recommendation. The system's working fine. A few hiccups are normal. Stop trying to justify your initial timeline. The problems continued. Most were minor. One wasn't. Flight SB-447, a regional jet flying cargo from our main hub to a secondary airport, was assigned a route by Nexus that should have been straightforward. But the algorithm hadn't properly accounted for the new aircraft's weight distribution characteristics. The cargo load was balanced according to standard protocols, but the specific aircraft model had a slightly different center of gravity threshold. Nothing catastrophic happened. The flight landed safely. But the pilot reported handling difficulties during approach, and the post-flight inspection found stress indicators on the airframe, nothing damaged, but unusual wear patterns that shouldn't have appeared on a routine flight. The incident report landed on my desk flagged as potential system error. I investigated immediately. Ran diagnostics, traced the algorithm's calculations, identified the gap in my calibration data. The problem was exactly what I'd warned about: incomplete integration due to rushed implementation. I filed a detailed incident report with my analysis and recommendations. Ground the new regional jets until I could recalibrate the weight distribution algorithms with actual aircraft specifications, not manufacturer estimates. 2 weeks of work, maximum. The report went to Marcus. Marcus sent it to Damien. Damien's response came back through Marcus. System error identified and being addressed. No fleet action necessary. Continue monitoring. They weren't going to ground the jets. They were going to keep flying them and hope I could fix the problem around operational schedules. I tried one more time. I sent a direct email to Damien, copying Richard, explaining the technical specifics and the risk assessment. I used clear, unambiguous language. Continued operation without recalibration creates elevated risk of weight distribution errors that could compromise flight safety. Damien called me into his office the next morning. Damien's office was corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the airfield. I'd been in there exactly 3 times before. It was never for good conversations. He didn't ask me to sit. "I received your email," he said, standing behind his desk with his arms crossed. "Let me be very clear about something, Evadne. I appreciate technical expertise. I value analytical thinking. What I don't value is fear-mongering and insubordination. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm identifying operational risks based on data. You're trying to force your preferred timeline by exaggerating minor issues. That incident with SB-447 was a pilot reporting handling characteristics on an unfamiliar aircraft. The inspection found nothing wrong. The inspection found stress indicators within acceptable parameters. You're catastrophizing again. Marcus warned me you'd do this." Of course Marcus had warned him. They'd already decided I was the problem. "The system needs recalibration," I said, keeping my voice level. "That's not catastrophizing. That's responsible engineering. The system is fine. You rush the integration, and now you're trying to cover yourself by creating alarm. I see what's happening here." What's happening is I met an impossible deadline by making compromises I documented extensively. Now those compromises are creating exactly the problems I predicted. Fixing them isn't covering myself, it's doing my job. Damien's expression went cold. "Your job is what I say it is. And right now, your job is to monitor the system, address minor issues as they arise, and support our operational growth. Not to undermine company initiatives with worst-case scenario hypotheticals. Flight safety isn't a worst-case scenario hypothetical. Nobody's safety is at risk. You're being dramatic because you don't like being told no." There was that word again. Dramatic, the word men use when women refuse to be quiet. "I'm being precise," I said. "There's a difference. The only thing you're being is insubordinate. Consider this an official warning. Drop this crusade about grounding aircraft, or there will be consequences for your employment." We stared at each other across his expensive desk. Through the windows behind him, I could see one of the new regional jets taxiing for departure. "Are you ordering me not to report safety concerns?" I asked quietly. "I'm ordering you to stop exaggerating minor technical hiccups into safety crises. There's a difference." He was giving himself plausible deniability. If something went wrong, he could claim he'd never told me not to report legitimate concerns. I'd just been overreacting. I left his office without another word. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop. I had documentation going back 6 months. Emails, incident reports, risk assessments, technical analyses. A complete record of every concern I'd raised, every warning I'd given, every corner I'd been forced to cut. I also had a decision to make. Option 1, let it go. Keep monitoring Nexus, fix problems as they appeared, hope nothing catastrophic happened. Keep my job, my salary, my career trajectory. Swallow my pride and play the game. Option 2, escalate to the Safety Compliance Office. Trigger a formal review. almost certainly lose my job in retaliation, but at least create an official record that might prevent disasters. Option 3, report directly to the Federal Aviation Administration. Nuclear option. Blow the whistle on my own company, guarantee I'd never work in aviation again, but ensure actual regulatory oversight. I thought about my parents. My father, who drove delivery trucks for 30 years and never compromised on safety because someone's counting on that delivery, Mija, and someone's counting on you to get it there right. My mother, who worked retail management and always said, if you see something wrong and stay quiet, you're part of the problem. They'd raised me to value integrity over convenience. But they'd also raised me during times when jobs were precious and employers held all the power. They'd taught me to be careful, strategic, to pick battles wisely. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to work and did something I'd never done before. I started building a backup of Nexus. Not the company's backup, a personal archive. Every algorithm, every line of code, every data integration protocol. I copied it to an encrypted external drive. If they were going to force me out for trying to protect safety, they weren't going to lock me out of proving I'd been right. It took 3 days to complete the backup without triggering IT security alerts. I worked during lunch breaks, early mornings, late evenings, when the system monitoring was less active. On Friday afternoon, I filed a formal report with the Safety Compliance Office. Detailed technical documentation of the integration gaps, risk assessment for continued operations without recalibration, recommendations for corrective action. I sent it through official channels. I copied no one. I didn't give Damien advance warning. By Monday morning, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The Safety Compliance Office sent an investigator to interview me Tuesday afternoon. Professional, thorough, asked good questions. I walked her through the technical details, showed her the documentation, explained the timeline of events. She thanked me for the report and said they'd be conducting a full review. I never heard from her again. What I did hear, 2 days later, was Damien's voice outside my cubicle. Evadne, my office. Now, the walk down that hallway felt like walking to an execution. Marcus was already in Damien's office when I arrived. So was someone from Human Resources, a woman I'd seen around but never worked with directly. Sit down, Damien said. I sat. We've completed a review of your recent work on the Nexus system integration, he began, reading from a document. We've identified multiple instances of defective route calculations, improper weight distribution algorithms, and inadequate safety protocols. My stomach dropped. That's not accurate. The integration gaps I identified are exactly what I've been trying to. You submitted a system update that created safety risks, he interrupted. When those risks were identified, you attempted to deflect blame by claiming you'd been rushed. You filed false reports exaggerating minor issues. You wasted safety compliance resources with unfounded allegations. Every word of my compliance report was accurate and documented. Your compliance report was a manipulative attempt to cover your own inadequate work. The review committee found your claims unsubstantiated. What review committee? I spoke to one investigator. Internal review. We take safety seriously here, Evadne. We don't take kindly to employees who create false alarms to protect their reputations. He was rewriting history in real time. Everything I'd warned about, every concern I'd raised, he was flipping it, making me the problem instead of the person trying to prevent problems. This is retaliation, I said quietly. I filed a legitimate safety complaint, and now you're manufacturing cause to terminate me. The HR representative shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. This is consequences, Damien replied. Your system routes are defective. Your work has been inadequate. We're terminating your employment effective immediately for cause. For cause means no severance. Correct. And you're blaming me for problems I explicitly warned would happen if you rushed the integration I said needed 12 weeks. We're blaming you for delivering defective work and then trying to cover it up. Security will escort you out. Your system access is being revoked as we speak. Marcus actually smiled. Small, satisfied smile of a man watching a rival eliminated. I stood up. You're making a serious mistake. The only mistake was trusting you with critical systems. We'll find someone more competent. Security was waiting outside. Young guy looked uncomfortable. He walked me to my cubicle, watched while I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. Coffee mug my mother gave me. Small, succulent plant. A framed photo of my parents. 23 minutes after Damien said the word, defective, I was walking out of Skybridge Aviation with everything I owned from 2 years of employment in a box that weighed less than my laptop bag. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just left, but I had that encrypted drive in my purse. Every algorithm, every line of code, every piece of documentation proving exactly what I'd built and exactly what they destroyed. I spent Wednesday in my apartment, alternating between rage and despair. sending out resume updates, looking at job boards, wondering if I just destroyed my career in aviation for nothing. Thursday, I started getting calls from former colleagues. Quiet calls, people using personal phones. Something's wrong with Nexus, one of the junior analysts told me. Routes aren't optimizing properly. Marcus is trying to fix it, but he doesn't understand the architecture. Not my problem anymore, I said, but it bothered me all day. Friday morning, I got a call from a friend in maintenance scheduling. Half our crew rotations are conflicting with service windows. The system's generating impossible schedules. Marcus is running manual overrides, but it's chaos. They fired me for building a defective system, I said. Let them fix their perfect system themselves. Friday afternoon, the flight operations supervisor called. Evadne, off the record, fuel calculations are off. Not by much, but enough that we're having to adjust loads manually before every departure. Whatever Marcus changed, it broke something in the core algorithms. That got my attention. Fuel calculations weren't cosmetic, they were safety critical. Has anyone reported this to safety compliance? Marcus says it's just calibration issues. Temporary glitch while the system stabilizes. It won't stabilize. The architecture doesn't work that way. If core algorithms are compromised, it cascades. Can you come back, fix it? They fired me for cause. I don't work there anymore. Right, yeah, sorry, I just thought. Never mind. I almost called Richard. Almost offered to consult, help them stabilize things before anyone got hurt. But then I remembered. You're being dramatic. Stop catastrophizing. Team players find solutions. They'd made their choice. They could live with it. Friday evening, I poured a glass of wine and tried to watch television and not think about aircraft fuel calculations or cascading system failures or what happens when people who don't understand integrated architecture try to repair integrated systems. I went to bed early, phone on silent. When I woke up Saturday morning and checked my messages, I had 47 notifications. The timeline, as I later pieced it together, Friday 6:15 p.m. Flight SB-229 departed with a cargo load calculated by Marcus's manually adjusted Nexus version. The weight distribution was wrong. Not catastrophically, the aircraft was flyable, but wrong enough that the fuel consumption rate was higher than calculated. Friday 7:43 p.m. SB-229 landed at its destination with fuel reserves below regulatory minimums. The captain filed a safety report. Friday 9:20 p.m., 2 more flights reported similar fuel discrepancies. All 3 had cargo loads calculated by the adjusted system. Friday 11:35 p.m., the overnight operations manager, a career aviation professional who didn't care about office politics, compiled the 3 reports and sent an emergency notification to the FAA duty officer. Saturday 2:14 a.m., the FAA opened an investigation. Saturday 7:45 a.m., Federal Aviation Administration officials arrived at Skybridge Aviation Headquarters with emergency grounding orders. Every aircraft in the fleet, 47 planes, $680 million in assets, grounded pending safety inspections and system audits. By the time I saw my messages Saturday morning, Skybridge was national news. Aviation websites, business news, industry forums, everyone covering the story of a mid-sized cargo airline grounded by its own logistics system. My phone started ringing. Numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail. Then Richard's number appeared. I almost didn't answer. Evadne? His voice sounded like he'd aged 10 years overnight. We need your help. No, you don't. You have Marcus. He understands the system perfectly, remember. Marcus's changes broke core algorithms. The FAA is demanding a complete system audit and certification before they'll lift the grounding. We need someone who understands Nexus's full architecture. You fired that person, for cause. Silence on the line. I know mistakes were made. But right now, $680 million in aircraft are sitting idle. We're losing millions per day. Contracts are being canceled. If we don't get this fixed immediately, Skybridge won't survive. Sounds like a problem for your competent new hire. Evadne, please. I'm asking. You're not asking. You're begging. There's a difference. More silence. What would it take, he finally said, for me to help the company that destroyed my reputation and fired me for trying to prevent exactly this disaster? Yes. I looked at the ceiling of my apartment, thought about all the people who worked at Skybridge who had nothing to do with Damien's ego or Marcus's incompetence. Ground crew, pilots, cargo handlers, administrative staff. People with families and mortgages and lives that depended on the company staying operational. Full reinstatement, I said. Back pay from termination date. Written apology from Damien acknowledging the termination was unjustified. And Marcus Brennan fired. I can't promise, then good luck with the FAA. I hung up. Richard called back 20 minutes later. Damien wants to meet, in person. I'm sure he does. He's authorized to negotiate full reinstatement terms. I'm not negotiating. I gave you my terms. Yes or no? Can you at least meet with him? Professional courtesy? Professional courtesy is what you show employees before you fire them without cause. I'm fresh out. I hung up again. The third call came an hour later. Unknown number. I answered. Miss Reyes, this is Inspector Charlotte Webb with the FAA. I'm leading the investigation into the Skybridge aviation grounding. I'd like to speak with you about your role in developing their logistics systems. That was different. Of course, I said. When and where? We met that afternoon at a coffee shop near my apartment. Inspector Webb was 50s, gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of person who'd spent decades in aviation and didn't suffer fools. I've reviewed the incident reports from Friday night, she said after we sat down. I've also reviewed your employment file, including your termination documentation and your safety compliance report from last week. And I'm trying to understand how a company fires their senior systems analyst for reporting safety concerns, then experiences catastrophic system failures 5 days later. Funny how that works. Walk me through the Nexus system. How it's supposed to function, what you built, what changed. I spent 2 hours explaining the architecture, the integration protocols, the rushed implementation, the corners I'd been forced to cut, the warnings I'd given, the retaliation I'd faced. Inspector Webb took notes, asked sharp questions, understood the technical details in a way that told me she'd done her homework. Do you have documentation of all this? She asked. Every email, every report, every technical specification, complete archive. I'm going to need copies. Are you investigating the system failure or the termination? Both. If Skybridge retaliated against you for reporting legitimate safety concerns, that's a violation of federal whistleblower protections. If they then operated aircraft with known system deficiencies, that's a violation of safety regulations. If both those things are true, this is a serious federal case. How serious? The kind where executives lose their jobs and companies lose their operating certificates. I pulled out my laptop. Let me get you those files. Richard called again Sunday morning. We accept your terms, all of them. In writing, our attorney is drafting the agreement now. You'll have it by end of business today. And Marcus, terminated yesterday afternoon. And Damien, pause. Still employed. He's COO, Evadne. The board isn't going to fire a C-suite executive based on. Then no deal. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You want me to fix the system Damien broke by ignoring my expertise. He goes first, non-negotiable. I'll talk to the CEO. You do that. The CEO called me directly 2 hours later. Andrew Castellano, founder of Skybridge, a man I'd met exactly twice in 2 years. Miss Reyes, I owe you an apology, a significant apology. Yes, you do. I'm not going to make excuses. Damien came highly recommended. I gave him latitude to restructure operations. I didn't monitor the situation closely enough. That failure is mine. And now I have a grounded fleet, a federal investigation, and the person who can fix this telling me my COO has to go. You're not wrong. But I need you to understand the position this puts me in. The position you're in is the result of choices you made. I told you what I need. The question is whether you're willing to prioritize operational integrity over executive ego. Silence on the line. Long silence. Damien will be accepting a voluntary resignation effective immediately. We'll announce it as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. I want it announced as resignation pending investigation of operational failures. That's career suicide for him. He tried to engineer career suicide for me. I'm being generous by letting him resign instead of getting fired. Another pause. Agreed. Anything else? Marcus doesn't get a resignation. He gets fired for cause. I won't work for a company that gives him the dignity of a graceful exit after what he did. Done. When can you start? After I receive written agreements on every term, reviewed by my attorney. 2 business days. We're losing millions per day. You should have thought of that before you fired me. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, powerful. I returned to Skybridge on Wednesday morning. My badge worked. My office, not cubicle, office, was waiting. The agreement had included a promotion to Director of Logistics Systems with appropriate salary adjustment and a seat in operational planning meetings. The staff who'd worked under me looked relieved. A few looked guilty. They'd known what was happening, known it was wrong, stayed silent to protect themselves. I didn't blame them. Corporate survival isn't pretty. All right, I said in the emergency team meeting Wednesday afternoon. Show me what Marcus broke. It was worse than I'd thought. He hadn't just adjusted algorithms. He'd rewritten core functions without understanding how they connected to downstream processes. It was like watching someone repair a watch by smashing it with a hammer. How long to fix? Richard asked. To get you back in the air with FAA approval, 2 weeks minimum. 2 weeks? You wanted it done right. Right takes time. I can get you flying again in 3 days with manual overrides and reduced capacity, but full system restoration is 2 weeks. Do both. 3 days to get aircraft moving, 2 weeks to full optimization. I worked around the clock for 72 hours. My team, and they were my team now, worked alongside me. We stripped out Marcus's changes, restored original algorithms from my backup, recalibrated the integration protocols properly this time. On Saturday morning, 6 days after the grounding, Skybridge aircraft started flying again under FAA provisional approval with manual oversight. 2 weeks later, Nexus was fully operational, properly integrated, more efficient than ever. 3 months later, the FAA completed their investigation. Skybridge was fined $2.4 million for operating with deficient safety protocols. Damian Whitmore was personally fined and barred from executive positions in aviation for 5 years. Marcus Brennan's termination was upheld with cause. My whistleblower complaint was validated. The company was required to implement new protocols protecting employees who report safety concerns. I was offered a vice president position. I turned it down. A year after the grounding, I left Skybridge Aviation. Not fired, recruited. A major aviation consulting firm wanted someone to help airlines build integrated logistics systems. Someone who understood both the technical architecture and the organizational politics. Someone with a reputation for not backing down when safety was at stake. The salary was substantial. The work was meaningful. I took it. But before I left Skybridge, I did one final thing. I rebuilt Nexus with redundancy protocols that made it nearly impossible for executives to compromise core safety functions without triggering automatic alerts to safety compliance and the FAA. I built in documentation systems that tracked every override, every manual adjustment, every deviation from optimized protocols. I made it technically and legally difficult for what happened to me to happen to anyone else. Andrew Castellano, the CEO, understood what I'd done. You're building accountability into the code itself, he said in my exit interview. Someone has to, I replied. For what it's worth, you were right about everything. I'm sorry it took a federal grounding for me to see it. I'm not sorry it happened. I'm sorry it was necessary. What will you tell people about your time here? I thought about that. About the late nights and the betrayals and the vindication. About the moment Damian's face went pale when the FAA walked in. About Richard loosening his tie and whispering, "What have we done?" I'll tell them the truth, I said. That systems are only as good as the people who respect them. That integrity isn't negotiable. And that sometimes the right thing costs everything in the moment, but returns compound interest over time. He nodded. We'll miss you. You'll be fine. You have good people here. Just listen to them. My last day at Skybridge was quiet. No farewell party, no dramatic exit. I packed up my office, said goodbye to my team, and walked out the same doors I'd been escorted through a year earlier. The difference was everything. That's the story of how one termination decision brought an entire aviation company to its knees, and how standing up for what's right sometimes means losing everything before you gain anything. If stories like this resonate with you, stories about integrity in the workplace, standing up to corporate power, and the long game of professional vindication, I hope you'll consider subscribing. We're building a community on our way to 5,000 subscribers, and your support helps ensure these stories continue to be told. The subscribe button is available if you'd like to join us. I work in aviation consulting now. I help companies build systems that prioritize safety over convenience and accountability over politics. I teach engineers and analysts that their expertise matters, that speaking up is worth the risk, and that the people who call you dramatic are usually the ones who fear your precision. Sometimes former colleagues from Skybridge reach out. They tell me Nexus is still running, still optimizing, still saving the company millions while protecting safety. They tell me the culture changed after the grounding. That people speak up now, that concerns are heard, that the company learned its lesson. I hope that's true. But I also know that institutional change is fragile. That new executives will come in with their own egos and agendas. That the cycle could repeat if people aren't vigilant. That's why I built those accountability protocols into the system. Not because I don't trust people, but because I trust systems to outlast any individual person's good intentions. My mother asks me sometimes if it was worth it. The stress, the termination, the uncertainty, the fight. I tell her what I told Andrew Castellano. I'm not sorry it happened. I'm sorry it was necessary, but I'd do it again. Because at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror and know that when it mattered, when safety and career were on opposite sides of the scale, I chose correctly. I chose integrity. And that's a choice I'll never regret. My name is Evadne Reyes. I'm the woman whose matrix held a $680 million logistics infrastructure. The woman they called defective before they realized I was the only thing holding their operation together. And this is what happens when companies underestimate the wrong person.